And she really suffered with this. She got really bad anxiety. She stopped going into work. This is the lady Beth mentioned earlier who developed hair loss. 80% of her hair fell out due to stress.
And she was having CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy as well.
Yeah.
And they'd actually signed her off work.
Just a quick disclaimer, the content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, crime scenes and other disturbing material. Listener discretion is advised. This episode is sponsored by Think Forensic.
Think Forensic are a one-stop shop for all things forensic science and crime solving. They hold experience days, as well as corporate events, team building events and general education for primary school right the way up to university level, as well as other events and consultancy. There's also a shop where you can get your hands on all things crime solving, from evidence gathering to packaging and collecting evidence, as well as other forensic science equipment.
For more information or to book on an experience day, please visit the website.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Grave Secrets Pod. I'm your host, Beth.
And I'm Annie. And today we have got a brand new segment for you, haven't we? We've got a whole new segment of the podcast where we're going to be talking to you about what we've watched on TV or what we've listened to and we found really interesting. But first, can we just address the issue in the room today? So...
Sorry about this, everyone.
You are looking very nice and summery, right? You look like you are going to be on a beach in God knows where, in the Maldives.
Let's go somewhere, okay, or let's go Italy. I'd quite like
right,
to
she looks like she's on the Amalfi Coast somewhere. And I am in my tracksuit.
You look glam.
And I'm sorry, but I have faked it for this whole podcast, right? I have faked it, and I'm admitting it to you guys now, that I have kept up appearances for way too long, and I've lasted for 5 episodes, right, of me actually trying to dress and look nice and picking outfits out every bloody day for the podcast, and I'm just not doing it.
You're not going to do it anymore.
I'm not doing it. So this is me. And I'm in my tracksuit, and this is how you are going to see me for the foreseeable. So, you know, we just need to deal with that.
And I'm going to probably just get brighter every time. Because I did say at the beginning I was going to start out, like, you know, try and be
did dull
more
it down
tame.
quite a bit, didn't you, for the beginning with us talking about, like...
It's just not sustainable.
Crimes. No, and me just looking nice and picking outfits is not sustainable. So this is me, and this is how I am going to be from now on. So you're going to see me in a tracksuit every week, and you are going to see Beth getting brighter every week.
And for all those that only listen and don't see our faces, then...
That's fine. That's perfect.
What a waste.
That's perfect. If we weren't doing YouTube, I wouldn't have to get up and do my bloody makeup and hair every day
this
either.
Is true.
So
Very
yeah,
true.
this is where I think episode 6 is where our personalities have now come out.
Yes.
This is it, and this is us. So you like it. You either love it or you hate it, and we don't care. I'm fed up.
So on today's episode, it's now episode 6, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems to have gone quick. I know we say this all the time, but I feel like these episodes are just flying.
Yeah, they are. It's because we have such good fun, Annie.
Oh yeah, we love it. I see you every day of the week now. I see you at work. I see you at the podcast.
You can't get rid. So today's episode is going to be a little bit different to anything we've done before. We did mention that it's something that we wanted to diversify into.
Yeah.
And I think it's important, really, because there's a lot that goes on in kind of the current world, and we want to be present for that, don't we?
Yeah, and also, so today we're talking about stalking, and it's something that if you have listened or watched the episode, I think it was episode 3 with Linda Sage, she also touched on this
She did,
well,
which was
on
really
stalking.
interesting. It's quite nice.
Yeah.
Well, it's not nice, but it's interesting for us how the timings have kind of aligned.
Yeah.
Because, as you say, she was talking about stalking and the different laws, and again, funding. And that is now something that has become quite big in the news at the minute due to the Netflix drama Baby Reindeer.
Yes.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk to you about Baby Reindeer, which is currently out on Netflix. We're also probably going to mention the infamous now interview that one of the characters has then done with Piers Morgan.
Yep.
But then again, rooted in everything we talk about, we want to bring it back to the victims.
Yeah.
So we're also going to speak from our own perspectives, and then we are going to share some information from other documentaries, I should say, like specifically, which are based on stalking. And we will probably link back to some of the stats that Linda mentioned as well, because I do think it's significant.
Yeah, I think it's important to include the stats into it, because even though this is a subject that we've talked about before briefly with Linda and between ourselves, I feel like I still did not know some of the stats.
Yeah, it's one of those, isn't it, where you kind of know it's an issue, but you never actually know to what extent it takes place.
How big of an issue. I did not realise how big of an issue this was at all, really.
And it's one of those things where unless you have the statistics, i.e. unless these victims come forward and they can be registered as an incident, we just don't have those numbers.
No.
So even though we have the numbers and they're shockingly high now, they're still probably not accurate.
Because people have not reported. Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? But I'm just going to go through, I'm just going to jump straight in. I'm going to reel off some stalking stats for you, because I think doing this at the beginning really sort of puts the rest of the episode into perspective. So the highest age for being stalked is between 18 and 24, which I'm quite happy I'm out of that category.
Yeah, me too.
I'm a bit old now for that. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen in the other categories either.
It doesn't.
And we'll talk about personal experiences and show how, it has happened to us at times along the way in our life.
There's just no rhyme or reason, is there?
No.
With any of this.
No.
It's literally, unfortunately, potluck.
Yeah.
Some other crimes are quite calculated, and although stalking can become very calculated, who the victim is initially just tend to be quite random.
Yeah.
Or based on random circumstance.
Yeah, and mine was, there's a couple of instances that I'll talk about. One of mine was random stranger stalking. And the other one is not always something that I would refer back to. But when I read this statistic, I thought, wait a minute, that has happened to me.
It's relevant.
Yeah, wow. And that is relevant. So 45% of stalking cases is by an ex-partner.
Okay.
And that's where mine comes into it. And when I say I didn't really think about it, I knew that he'd turned up at places, I knew that he'd done some weird stuff, and I wouldn't class it as stalking. And
Because
then I read this and I was like, that was stalking. He turned up at my house unannounced multiple times.
Yes.
And that's not right.
No.
He turned up at places I was at and pretended, oh yeah, I was just here too.
Coincidence.
And I just let it go because I thought, oh, is that coincidence? Am I over exaggerating?
Yeah.
And no, absolutely not. I wasn't. I was in a domestic relationship with this man who was physically and mentally abusing me,
and then continued to abuse you once,
and then got me to question myself and think, oh no, I'm being overcautious here.
Yeah.
I'm the one that's overreacting, and that's a proper true sign of a narcissist, isn't it?
Yeah.
So looking back now when I'm older and I can actually talk about it,
yes,
is when you think, oh my God, I've been in a hell of a lot of dangerous situations at the hands of ex-partners.
But it's always after the fact, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's so easy to lose sight of things, and I think that's one of the things that when people question decisions, when people question the way that victims maybe acted in a certain situation, we just never know how you would react in that situation or how we ourselves would react. And equally, until you are embroiled in something, it's very difficult to see a way out.
Yeah.
No matter what it is, even just in general, when you make a bad decision on what boy you date, you've got your friends that'll all probably be telling you that it's a really bad idea.
But you always go the opposite way.
But you either go the opposite way or you just don't see it, do you? You just get those rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah.
And I think our natural default is to make excuses and blame ourselves. So whether it be a bad relationship or whether it be something that seems odd, like potentially you feel like you're being followed, your natural instinct is to think, no, I must be really anxious today, or no, you're just being silly.
Oh, it's just a coincidence.
It's a coincidence.
They could have been here just on their own, and it's just a coincidence that they've come to the same place.
And unfortunately, these stats show that that's probably not the case.
Yeah, but then going back to the reporting, I didn't report the guy because I thought, no, I'm being ridiculous here.
Yes.
So my stats are not included in this. And I can look back now and say, yes, it was a case of stalking. And, you know, I've not contributed to this. And then I feel bad because I think, well, if I'd have, you know, done a bit more back in the day and realised it was stalking, if I'd have come forward, maybe not just me, obviously, on my own.
Yeah.
But, like, if I'd have thought like that, more people might
What
have come
difference
forward.
would it make?
Could it have made a difference to, like, other girls that were getting stalked?
Yeah.
And it just relates back in a circle, doesn't it? But this episode in particular, I feel like it's well, it's not nice to talk from this point of view, but when we do case studies, you can sympathise with the victims, you can see the victim's point of view, you can do your research into it. But in this episode, like, I am genuinely talking from a victim's point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got personal experience.
Yeah, you've got personal experience in it. So I feel like I've got more to add to it, and it comes across more personable. And it's only now that I would actually talk about this stuff, whereas,
no, of course,
you know, a few years ago, you would never catch me coming on a podcast and broadcast into the world how I've had, you know, an ex that was abusive.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't have done it. I would have just sort of hidden it away.
But I think, like you said, you feel a bit guilty about the fact that you should have said something at the time.
Yeah.
This is you now saying, you know, maybe I didn't do anything at the time, but I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
And actually now I can talk about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's all it takes, isn't it? It's just people constantly letting it breathe, giving it airtime, making it part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Because it's like with anything, it's like, you know, male mental health is a big one at the minute that people are trying to get more naturally into everyday conversations. The more that we talk about these things, it doesn't make it any easier, but it raises awareness and hopefully will lead to change.
Yeah.
So I think that's what
The only thing is when you say about, oh, you know, let it breathe, I've been lucky enough to be able to let it breathe and the situation has cooled down and nothing's happened. Some of these cases we're going to talk about, you know, they did report it to the police, they did give it a minute to breathe, and they ended up losing their life. Yeah. You know, it's crazy, isn't it? To think that these things can escalate so quickly
to such a degree.
well. Yeah.
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 And I think one of the things, especially with stalking, is that, again, there's no rhyme or reason for a lot of the time. And there are actually a lot of different emotions involved.
Yeah.
So again, if we talk about the Baby Reindeer case, effectively, it's a series. It's 7 or 8 episodes.
I think it's quite long. I seem to think it was quite long. I'd probably say about 8.
And it is based on the true story. Yeah. Now, Richard Gadd, who wrote and actually starred in the Netflix show, says that this is based completely on his own experience. Yeah. There have since been kind of suggestions that we don't necessarily have proof of everything that occurs in the drama. Yeah. But taking it at face value, it is a true story about a male who was stalked by a female who had prior convictions for stalking. Yeah. And effectively the only reason that he was chosen as Martha, the stalker's victim, was because she came across him in a bar, a pub in London where he was working. Yeah. So again, it's that random element. Yes. Creating. Yeah. A whole.
And I like this, the Baby Reindeer that we're going to talk about as well, because I feel like we're not just talking about this from a woman's point of view. And although it is 4 out of 5 stalking victims are women, this does happen to men as well.
To be women.
And men don't report it. It's just like we said before, isn't it? With especially in like the domestic violence situations, men are much less likely to report something. And I think men watching this, the Baby Reindeer series, hopefully will open it up as a
I did see a
point.
Stat that actually I don't remember what percentage it was, but that so many more men have actually called in and reported.
Right, which is
since.
a good sign.
Yeah.
And only 5% of stalking cases that have been reported lead to a conviction. 5%.
Horrendous.
And I think with that stat out there, that will put people off in itself. Because if I knew that I was going to go to the police and report something, but there was only a 5% chance something was going to be done about it, I think that would put me off.
Yeah.
And over the last 10 years, stalking cases have risen massively. Well, the reports in stalking have risen. I don't know if it was already happening more, but it's gone from under 3,000 to over 120,000 cases a year. Is this down to people just reporting it now, or is it down to a case of it being made easier?
Yeah, or not necessarily easier, but more instances can occur due to like technology and stuff now.
That's what I was thinking. Social media, people can track you through social media. And we touched on with the Linda podcast how I no longer, very rarely post in real time.
Yeah, this
on
even
my social
happened.
media.
This even happened last night. My housemate put on her story a video of a fire that we'd had like 3 nights prior.
Yeah.
And it was only her mates that replied, but like 3 people replied saying, "Oh my God, where's this? Can I come in for a fire?"
Can I come?
Because everyone
nice.
just naturally believes what they see and thinks it must be there and then.
Yeah.
And so it's easier to find locations via social media. You now also have things like Snapchat maps.
Yeah.
Again, if we're talking about stalking that happens within someone that's been in a romantic relationship, then maybe they have had Find My iPhone and they've had the location services on.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe it is easier or there's more instances because there's more opportunity to come across them.
Yeah.
In those situations. Whereas previously, prior to all that technology, it probably would have been work, home, and then if you have a specific routine, maybe gym or a hobby kind of thing. Whereas now it could be anywhere at any time.
Yeah, and even not like when you're not posting things on social media, like I sometimes take photos in the gym, but I'll post them later on in the day or whatever. But I don't particularly know a great deal of people in the gym because I'm not from Huddersfield. But I go to my gym regular enough to go in there and normally see round about the same people. And now I've started like making a few gym friends, chatting to people, and they'll say, "Oh, I was in here yesterday at this time and I noticed you weren't in," or noticed you weren't here. And I'm a bit sporadic, so I like to do certain classes, but my routine around that will be a bit
shift
here and there. And it's not for any particular reason other than sometimes I want to stay in bed in the morning or, sometimes we've got other stuff that we need to do, but I quite like it like that. And I'm one of them people as well, when I take my dogs for a walk, unless I'm out walking the dogs with Jay, I don't take the same route all the time. I might reverse the route. I might go a different route. I might go to a totally different location in general. And I think as a woman, just walking around, just doing something simple like dog walking, you have to think about these things.
And it's easy for us because we don't have a set routine for work. But for those people that do have a work routine, everything else becomes part of your routine because
your gym's
you've only
before work,
you
leave at a certain time.
So I think we're quite lucky in that sense, but there are a lot of people that have to work by routine, so they don't have that option.
So there's something called an SPO, which is a stalking prevention order, which was introduced in 2020, and that was meant to address the perpetrators before the behaviour escalated. I don't know how effective that is. I don't know if it's a known thing. I don't know if it's every single police force that would enforce it, because the main thing throughout this is how hard it is for these people to get it through to the police to take seriously. And I think that reflects in both the Baby Reindeer and in the documentaries we're going to talk about. And I spoke about one once called Can I Tell You a Secret?
Yes.
That was a very, very good documentary, but it showed the women in this instance going to the police multiple times, and no one really did a great deal about it. And in the next documentary that I'm going to talk about, which is Stalking State of Fear, in that the stalking was reported multiple times to the police and it escalated. and nothing was done. These people are classed as low level and not intimidating. And there's actually two different types of stalking.
That's what I was just about to say. This blows my mind. I just can't understand the reasoning behind, the thought behind this.
So you've got stalking without fear and stalking with fear. I'm sorry, but if you're being stalked, where's the without fear?
Yeah, it's not
This
possible.
person who brought this in, I think, is a male.
To me, the only time that you would see stalking without fear is if the victim wasn't aware of the fact that they were being stalked, but then it wouldn't have been reported. So it just doesn't make any logical sense. It doesn't make sense,
but this is why I think it must have been a man, because as a woman, like we've just said, you go out of the house and you look over your shoulder. You think about where you're going to walk on your own. You think about where you're going to walk the dogs. You change your routine. I don't know, like if I said to Jay, would you change your routine? It probably wouldn't even have crossed his mind.
Why would I?
Whereas it does with us. So the stalking without fear doesn't make sense, because if you're going to get stalked, that is going to be some kind of fear on the person you're stalking.
Yeah. Again, whether or not it just comes down to proof of fear, I'm not sure.
How would you prove, though?
Exactly.
In some of these cases, there was even proof of fear, and it's still not escalated far enough. But back to Baby Reindeer, which I think has been like one of the most popular.
It has. It's
Netflix
been one of the
shows.
most watched.
And when I watched the Piers Morgan episode, who was interviewing the real life Martha, there was over 10 million views, and it had only been on a few hours.
Yeah.
So it just shows how invested people are in this whole
For me,
thing.
I think it was the way that it was portrayed. So there are a lot of people that will watch films or series specifically because it says based on a true story. Because if it's based on a true story, it's inherently interesting, because you know it's someone's lived experience.
Yeah.
And in this case, you knew that it was a true story, and you also knew that the main character of the series is actually the victim in this case.
Yeah.
So I think for a lot of people, that's an instant or an instant interest.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I think quite quickly it became really clear that the way that this series was shot and written and filmed captured the nuances of not only stalking, but being a victim and being vulnerable.
Yeah.
It doesn't paint the victim in a good light.
Yeah.
He has not come out and said, you know, I did nothing wrong. All I did was, you know, be nice to someone, and then it's all gone.
It's pretty much the opposite.
It's
I
the
found
opposite.
with
It's very honest. I think that's one of the key elements. It's very honest, and it shows that how your relationship with yourself and relationships with other people has a direct impact on whatever happens. And I think what it brings to light is that regardless of whether or not it's stalking, people deal with things depending on their personal experiences.
Yeah, and another thing I liked with the Baby Reindeer is that it showed you a bit of how the people around him reacted when he told them about the situation, and it was like different within different groups of people.
Yes.
Which I found really interesting as well. And I was thinking, oh God, like I wonder if, you know, I hope to God my friends wouldn't act like that if I said I was in danger, you know. And it is just for the fact that he was a man, isn't it? Because if it was a woman, I can't ever see you coming to me and saying, look, I'm being stalked, and me saying, oh yeah,
no, don't worry about it.
Get over it, it's fine, like don't worry.
And I do also think that there is an element of it which was based on people's perceptions. We've obviously talked about the fact that it's a male victim versus a female offender, but equally them as people, Martha was a little bit overweight.
Yeah.
She had quite a friendly accent. He even said that her laugh was kind of mesmerising, and he wanted to hear it more. So if you're looking at face value, she doesn't appear to be threatening.
Yeah.
again, if you look at a man versus a woman, quite often men are either taller or more widely built.
Yep.
So there is a natural reason almost to see them as more threatening. In this case, it's flipped on its head.
Yeah.
So you do kind of think that people would just bat it off as being, you know, even if she is following you around, what's the worst that can happen?
Oh, it's harmless.
Yeah,
She's
exactly.
harmless sort of thing. She just likes you, or
Yeah. But as you see, very quickly, even just the presence of someone can have a massive, massive impact.
Yeah. So the first episode for me, I was sort of not that into it. I was sort of thinking, a bit like what you've just said, it comes across as all a bit like she's just walked into a pub, she wants to see a friendly face. And obviously they've made it to come across that way to start with. A very friendly person, she sits down, she wants to chat, she's a bit upset, you know, and then he does what you think any guy would probably do.
Yeah.
If a woman's upset.
Gives her a free cup of tea.
Yes.
Or a Diet Coke.
Yeah, cup of tea would definitely be the one for us, wouldn't it? So I feel like in the first one I was a bit like, oh, what's happening? Is it really? And a lot of the time when something is based on a real story or real events, you think, oh my God, why is this not more straight into it? And you think, no, it is real. Like, you know, they've not made this up. This is someone's real, true story.
Yeah.
So yeah, the first episode I sort of got the impression that she was... you know, she was lonely.
Yes.
She came across as being lonely and wanted someone to talk to and wanted some company.
Yeah. But as the series goes on, you find that, as I mentioned earlier, it's the nuances within stalking.
Yes.
So one key thing that I want to mention is that stalking isn't always someone being in love with you and completely infatuated with you, either that has been in a romantic relationship with you or may want that, but it's not ever obtainable. Neither is it always a person that is acting in malice, that is wanting basically revenge or a one-up on you. It's so complex. Stalking is so complex, and it doesn't excuse it or belittle it in any way, but it just shows you that there is no kind of one way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they will stalk you because you're on their mind and they want to see you. Sometimes it will be because they're upset with the world and they are stalking you because of it. Sometimes it's because they're angry with you and they are wanting to threaten you. The kind of any emotion seems to come back to the one way to deal with their emotions is to stalk.
Yeah.
That seems to be the thread. It doesn't matter the reason.
Especially with Martha, because I'm probably jumping the gun a little bit here, but talking about emotions, when she would stalk him in all those situations, if she was angry with him, if she missed him, if she was in love with him, when every single emotion she was going through, there was an email, there was a message, there was something, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Which I'm sure we'll go into a little bit more in detail later on. But as the episodes got on, you sort of think, wow, this is getting serious.
Yeah, it's so intense, isn't it?
And you think, if you put yourself in this position, what stage do you go to the police? At what stage do you report something? If it's when she first does something, again, you're thinking like, I can't just report on this one little thing.
Well,
and
one instance that
you
might
don't know
be.
if it's going to escalate.
Yeah.
And I've worked in a pub and I've been I've been behind the bar a lot, and people do come in and they do tell you a lot, and they do release a lot of information to you because they might have had a couple of drinks, or they tell you their problems, or they expect you to be there to talk to them, cheer them up or whatever. And so I do see his point of view. If someone had walked in when I was managing a pub and someone would have been crying their eyes out or being upset, I would have done the exact same thing. Sit down, let me make you a cup of tea, let me get you a drink. Like, are you all right?
Yeah. And logically, at that stage, you're not wary of people because you don't think, oh, do you know what? If I make this woman or if I make this man a cup of tea,
are they
he might become a stalker. That's just not your process.
Yeah. You're more thinking, I hope they're okay.
Yeah.
And you could tell that's what it was in this situation. You know, when she first came in and he gave her the tea or whatever, I feel like it was, oh God, like it sort of, I hope she's all right, and maybe a bit uncomfortable that she was crying. Like, go on.
Yeah, like to pacify her.
Yeah,
almost.
let's just try and calm the situation.
But then equally you see that he is a complicated character. He's going through a lot of his own struggles. And actually what he saw in Martha, who effectively was just a stranger that kept popping into the pub, was attention. Yeah. And whether it be positive or negative, what he found in that was a level of comfort initially, in that it was familiarity, it was someone to talk to, and it kind of detached him from his troubles and gave him something else to focus on. Yeah. So again, it's this complicated relationship. It's not as easy as someone that's stalking me, I hate their guts.
Yeah, I need to report them.
Yeah, I don't want anything to do with them. For a lot of people, it is more complicated. So you can't really say how many times would something happen before you report it.
Yeah.
And equally, like we spoke about with Linda, you might then notice that something seems to be becoming a habit, but it's very unlikely. And you might then start mentioning it to people around you. You might talk to your friends about it. But it's very unlikely that you would be making a point of writing these instances down at this stage.
In the beginning,
And unfortunately, as soon as you go and report it to the police, the first thing they will ask is whether or not you have a timeline or whether or not you have this written evidence as to what's occurred.
You want dates and times.
Yeah, and it's very unlikely that you will have that at this point.
Yeah, so when he went in and reported the stalking to the police, to start with, they obviously dealt with it shocking anyway. I think him being a man and reporting a woman, it was sort of brushed off quite quickly.
Yeah. And again, you don't know what he actually said, but the way it was portrayed was that the main piece of evidence he showed them were these emails that she'd been sending. He didn't really mention the fact that she was repeatedly coming into the pub. Yeah. So they probably thought it was more of a virtual threat than a physical threat.
Yeah, yeah. But all those emails, because they weren't particularly saying anything nasty or threatening at this point, they were more nice, weren't they?
Yeah.
And I think the police, that's when they looked at him and was like, is that it? Like, is that all you've got? And then when they said, how long has it been going on? And he said 6 months. That's a long time for something to be going on, whether it's someone, like you said, being nice to you. It's not always someone being nasty to you and threatening you. This person was obviously in love with him, wasn't she?
Yes.
She was infatuated with him from that amount of emails.
Yeah.
And it's just, I suppose, lucky at the beginning that she didn't have his phone number.
Yeah. So at the beginning, it kind of starts with the police officer saying to him, well, why haven't you reported it before the 6 months? And at first you think, hang on a minute, like we've just discussed. Well, it's probably because you don't necessarily notice a pattern at first. Like, give the guy a chance, give him some leeway. And then what was interesting for me is as I was watching it, I was very defensive of the victim to begin with. But then as you watch the first few episodes, I did find myself thinking, oh, well, this is really serious. Why hasn't he reported it?
Yeah. And
equally, there are instances that do involve other people.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, why hasn't he reported it now? Surely, what's it going to take almost? And again, this is where you have to come back to constantly thinking about what the victim is going through.
Yeah.
You don't know why they haven't reported it. There's always a reason for someone's behaviour. Whether it be good or bad behaviour, there will be a reason for it. And in this case, later on, you find that it was actually due to a completely separate, unfortunately also a crime. It was a serious sexual assault that he had encountered and that he was the victim of, which led him to feel such great shame, which then became the reason he didn't want to report his stalking. Because one, he already felt shame, and two, the way he saw it was that Martha, his stalker, was ill. She was mentally unwell, and that he'd not reported his attacker, but his attacker was actually conscious of what he was doing.
And had done what he said was worse.
Yeah, and wanted power over him, and it was more intentional. So the way he portrayed it was, you know, how can I report someone that's mentally unwell if I haven't reported someone that's intentionally hurt me?
I think that was a constant battle in his mind the whole way through, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think it was quite obvious that was going on.
And as soon as he says, you know, my shame stopped me from doing anything about it.
You're like, oh,
I thought,
yeah.
God, you can never assume to know. You can never question why someone hasn't or has done something.
Yeah.
Because of course that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
But until you know.
And until you've been in that situation, we wouldn't know, would we? And we say that a lot on the podcast, like, and unless we are ever in that situation, we don't know how we would react.
No.
In there as well. I feel like in this, she did gradually escalate.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly how long a period of time it was over, but it started off by obviously just going into the pub, and then the emails. Oh no, was it Facebook first?
Emails and then Facebook.
Emails and then Facebook, and then eventually getting his phone number, being outside his house.
Yeah, turning up at his gigs. So he would do like open mic nights of comedy, and she would turn up.
And like heckle him, wouldn't she, at some of them?
Yeah. So there were lots of different forms of evidence, but again, they weren't all necessarily provable.
Yeah, and I suppose he actually got a girlfriend at one point, didn't he? And when Martha attacked his new girlfriend, I just felt then like it's not just involving you now, it's involving someone else.
Yeah.
And that is definitely a point where I think I would have gone to the police, because it had hurt someone that you say you love.
Yeah.
And it was almost like, not like he took Martha's side, but he let it slide.
Yeah, but then
he let her get away with it, and then obviously the poor woman suffered as well.
But then again, that romantic relationship was complicated, and he felt shame there. So I think again, it comes back to the victim, and you know, I completely agree with you. I'd like to think if it started involving someone that I loved, that would be the point where I say, now, come on, Beth. We've got to do something about this. Yeah. But again, he said that for whatever reason, his shame just...
He didn't want people to find out about her, did he? Yeah. So that's where he said the shame
taking over.
Again. And I know people can sit in front of the TV, can't they? And they were probably, like I was, shouting, report it. Like, why haven't you reported it yet? Like, why haven't you reported that? And there was a instance as well with Martha on the canal, wasn't there, where she followed him.
Yeah.
So followed him home.
We're talking now about it having escalated into physical stalking behaviour and physical violence. So it had gone from virtual, effectively, to just coming and sitting at the bar, or maybe turning up at places that he was. But now we're talking about physical
following,
violence, following, and assault on both him and the people that he cared about. And what I found most frustrating, the bit where I was kind of shouting at the telly, was it's later on in the series, and it's when Martha actually physically attacks him in the bar with a glass.
Yes.
And he's physically attacked, he is bleeding, he is clearly traumatised, and the workers of this bar, who are potentially questionable anyway.
They want to be the lads, don't they? The group of lads.
But when he basically confronts them and says, she's been stalking me, she's just attacked me, their response is to say, it's really rubbish, mate, I know, but we'll buy you a drink and we'll come to one of your comedy gigs. We just can't let you go to the police and report this instance because they were basically doing illegal drugs. So they'd turned the cameras away from where they should have been facing, and equally there should have been a manager on the bar at that time and there wasn't. So they were more concerned with
about themselves
and them getting into trouble than they were with him reporting it. But equally, you're already in that victim state, and I very much believe that our head goes from being like adult and child, and when we're in victim state, you're not thinking logically. And if you've got someone telling you that you can't report it because you will get them into trouble, you don't think rationally. You think, oh God, no, well, I don't want to cause more of a situation.
Yeah,
even
I don't
though
want
you're
anyone
the
else to
victim.
have to be involved in it.
Yeah, even though you're the victim, you think, well, I don't want anyone else to get into trouble. I don't want to make this a bigger situation than it already is. Therefore, he didn't report it. And the bit that frustrated me, not only is that they were being so selfish about it, is that what a lot of people, I think, fail to realise is that the police are there to keep us safe. The police aren't there looking for an arrest of a man on a minor charge. If they've got a person, a victim, that's been seriously assaulted, they are not going to be interested in why the bar didn't have a manager on.
Yeah, it takes priority. The more serious offence would take priority.
Yeah. So, it just frustrated me because I thought, no, I'm sorry, but that would be so much more...
it's irrelevant.
Yeah, it's irrelevant. They'd be so much more interested in trying to prevent this from happening again and protecting the victim than they would, a bar not following protocol. Yeah, they might report them to some bar authority or whatever, but that's the least of anyone's worries.
Isn't it? Yeah. And I don't know, just the guys in general who we told, I feel like they were quite bad at dealing with it, but when his ex-girlfriend found out what he'd been through, I feel like she was really good.
Yeah.
And her mum, who also, helped him out and let him stay.
Yeah. Again, it's really good at showing you, I keep using the same phrase, but like the nuances of, so you've got the nuances of people's emotions internally, but then it also beautifully showed the nuances of relationships with other people.
Yeah.
And that they are complicated.
Yeah.
And the way that they can play out, I think.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we see in Baby Reindeer that Martha, who had been previously convicted for other stalking charges, does then eventually get convicted for stalking again and is sentenced. She does plead guilty, but that it was only down to, from what we can tell in the series, him becoming equally as obsessive in terms of listening to all of the voicemails she'd sent, and basically categorising them and spending...
It was almost like a full-time job for him to categorise all the voice notes. But I did think what was really brave is when he did the gig.
Yes.
And he came out with his story. And obviously he's meant to be a comedian and he's meant to go on stage and be funny and make people laugh. But the lads who were in the pub were in the audience. And I feel like that's when you could see on their faces, I know it's obviously televised, but it dawned on them that is what this guy has been going through for a long time.
Yeah.
And when it was out in the open, a lot of it seemed to be lifted.
Yeah, from him.
Yeah, from him, from his point of view. And I feel like him coming out with it and telling people then lifted the sort of thought of shame from him, which then made him be able to go to court and do stuff like that. Because I feel like if he still felt shame.
And he went and talked to his parents, and he was kind of forced into it. But he did then go and speak to his parents. And again, he said that was the best night's sleep he'd had.
Yeah.
Because you've let all that weight off.
Yeah,
your chest,
it's off your chest. Yeah. Yeah, so I think it is in this one, it's good to see the perspective from the male point of view as well. Because, like you said, he didn't paint himself as some sort of angel. He did say in there that he was, damaged. He got quite obsessed over Martha a little bit at one point as well.
Yeah.
And he admitted a lot of things around that area, didn't I?
Yeah, again, I think that there was a lot of sexual confusion within him and within his experiences. And that plays out no matter what we go through. So often within abuse and within stalking, you do see that people will act in ways that you don't necessarily understand.
Yeah.
But it is due to that confusion around how they are feeling and what they've experienced. And it's almost like putting yourself through something again as if you deserve it. Like it's another form of abuse, but a self-abuse.
Yeah.
So in the Baby Reindeer case, obviously awful, but thankfully she was convicted. And I think what was interesting is that victims of stalking can sometimes struggle with not hearing from their stalker just as much as the incessant stalking, because it's that unknown. If you have someone that you know is going to turn up at your work every morning, or be there when you finish work, or be there when you get to the gym,
I suppose you prepare yourself for it mentally.
Yeah. However, if they stop doing that, or if they stop any of those repetitive behaviours, you suddenly think, well, what are they planning? What are they thinking
what's
next?
happened? Yeah.
Is it going to escalate even further?
And it is the unknown.
So it's the fear of the unknown as well. And in a couple of the cases that we're now going to talk about, unfortunately, through not knowing the stalker's next steps, not everyone is as lucky to have survived.
Yeah. So the stalking state of fear, I had not actually seen this advertised anywhere, and this is something that I would watch in general. And Jay's friend texted him and said, I'm on TV.
Right.
Would you like to watch it?
So it's a documentary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was like, yeah, obviously we want to watch it. We love seeing people that we know on TV. And you're like, oh yeah, I know him. So he sent us a link over. We put it on record, and then we didn't get around to watching it for a few days. And then I saw it recorded. I said, we need to watch this.
Yeah.
And I must say that when I was watching this, it was upsetting. You know, when the families are talking, it breaks your heart to listen to what some of these families have been through. And the Stalking State of Fear is a documentary that follows women that are under threat, or follows the families of women who are actually taking on the criminal justice system to bring their stalkers to account.
It effectively shows you that there aren't enough resources in place currently within 100%. The system to deal with this as a form of crime. And unfortunately, it's through the sheer volume of cases and people like the ones that are mentioned in the documentary. It's only thanks to those people that we are slowly making progress. But you can see in the documentary there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, there certainly is. And is all we can hope for is that over time the police will work together with these families and put things in place so that it makes a difference and it doesn't happen in the future.
Yeah, one thing that I found from watching the documentary was that we kind of joke that you become a bit immune to certain serious situations, in terms of I can now watch documentaries on telly that are showing postmortems and guts and gore, and I can be eating my tea. Yeah. And then I suddenly think, that's probably a little bit strange, because most people would not have an appetite.
It only gets me when Jay says to me, why are you talking about this while eating or watching this? And I'm like,
oh yeah, good point.
I didn't realise, it doesn't compute in my head. But this, I must admit, this documentary did
I was exactly the
strike a
same.
nerve.
I was the same, and I don't have that personal experience, but for me, and I don't know why, but it was when one of the victims showed the physical kind of turmoil, the physical symptoms that had presented, which was that she'd developed alopecia due to the anxiety that she was suffering, and she'd lost 80% of her hair. Now, again, I can't tell you why that struck a chord with me more than anything else.
Yeah.
But it did, and I did find this documentary was quite difficult to watch.
Yeah.
Because it's just, again, it's that element of random, you know, it could happen to anyone. All these people did exactly the right things. They reported it. They did what they could. And they still find themselves in these situations.
Yeah. So it covered quite a few cases. I've got a couple in particular that I want to focus on from this, because I feel like not that any were more important than the others, but some of them had more serious outcomes.
Yeah.
And some of them went into a little bit more detail about how the justice system worked and the court process. The first one we're going to talk about is Gracie Spinks, and she was 23 years old, and she was from Derbyshire, which is not a million miles away from us again. No. And I had heard about this case before, and I'd read about this case. And watching it and just seeing the family and seeing pictures of her really got me choked up.
Yeah,
like
for me it was that, and then it was the actual photos of the evidence.
Yes,
I found really difficult.
Yeah,
because I mean, me and you had talked about it before even I'd watched the documentary.
Yeah,
and you'd kind of mentioned these weapons, a bag of weapons, and I thought, oh yeah, that's awful.
Yeah.
But when you physically see it, I don't know why, but
it's more shocking, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So Gracie Spinks, 23, she actually reported to the police on the 4th of February 2021 that a guy called Michael Sellers was obsessed with her and wouldn't leave her alone. He was a colleague. So she was actually working with him. I think it was in a warehouse. And then one day he had followed her to her stables. So she had some horses kept nearby to her house. And he followed her to the stables so he knew where it was. And then he waited for her outside the stables. And I think if you've got a friend at work or you talk to someone at work, they might know a little bit about your personal life. They might know you like horses. But if you know you've not told them where you live or where your horses are, it means they've followed you to find out this information.
They've specifically sought out that.
Yeah. So for him to be there outside the stables, I think it took she was probably quite shocked.
Yeah, definitely.
By that, and thought, well, how would he know this? Has he followed me? Where's he come? You know.
Yeah. And equally, you're in a public area, but there's probably no one else around. It's not like there's other people that you could go
just
to.
Wave down and be like, oh, can you just help
and
me?
in this case, she actually rang work because it was before work that she'd gone to the stables, and she actually rang work and said, I'm going to be late, but it's because he's here and I don't feel safe.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to be able to get out of the car or come to work until he's gone, basically.
And the thing is here, though, the thing that got me is work was like, oh, he's done similar situations before that have been recorded.
Yeah.
But this is probably the worst one yet.
Yeah.
And they actually did a disciplinary on him.
Yeah.
And then they later, I think it was the day after, they fired him.
Yeah, they did.
They fired him from work, which then turned the situation from him loving Gracie, wanting to be with her, to then the bitterness.
Yeah.
And thinking, well, you got me fired.
Yeah.
You know, it's not down to anything, didn't think it was down to anything he'd done.
No. And again, there is that element of like delusion, because he was reported to have been telling people at work that they were actually in a relationship and that Gracie was his girlfriend.
Yeah.
Which
she made quite clear on the reports to the police, and when she was on the phone to the police, there was no relationship.
No. And she was really brave and really honest, because again, it shows you the audio call to the police, and she basically says, look, I did feel unsafe, but I don't think he's going to hurt me at this stage. I'm just concerned that it could happen again, and that if he's already done it to other people, it could escalate, and I don't want other people to be hurt.
And she said, what if he kidnaps someone else? My heart nearly broke then. I was like, oh my God, like... He's just...
So she rang the police and basically said, I just want it on record that, again, he's exhibiting these behaviours.
Yeah.
And they said that, you know, they would be back in touch to ask him more questions, and that if anything more serious happened, to call 999. And you think, well...
To be fair, the police did come out to see Gracie and her mom, and she went through a full account of, you know, what had been happening. The thing is, though, the police, during this visit, did not take any notes. There was obviously no body cam footage, and it was actually categorised as low risk, which I can't get my head round.
No. And then the other thing that was really difficult to kind of comprehend is that they then went and spoke to him, again, apparently just in a car park. Like, they asked him some questions from wherever they'd found him in this car park, at which point he said that they were in a relationship and that Gracie was his girlfriend. So again, you would think that the police would kind of gain both of those pieces of intel
and link them together and think this is a warning.
Say, hang on a minute. Well, maybe not even a warning at that stage, but maybe just
something's not
these
right.
are two different accounts, and we need to try and fathom out whether or not which one's telling the truth effectively.
Yeah.
Because if they were in a relationship, you'd assume there'd be text messages between them, or there might be photos on social media.
Yeah, and she was quite open and said, we were getting to know each other.
Yeah.
I went to his house once. He came to my house once.
Yeah.
And that was that. I didn't want to pursue it any further, and that should have been where it was left. So if we now go to the 6th of May, 2021, a dog walker was out walking the dog, and they found a rucksack near Gracie's stables. They had a look in the rucksack and rang the police immediately. So this was a major cause for concern. So it contained weapons. There was knives in there, various different size knives.
And they weren't like kitchen knives or like ordinary knives. They were like specific hunting knives. You know, the ones that have the sheaths on them. They were like specific hunting knives, weren't they?
Yeah. There was also a note in there that said, "Don't lie." I don't understand what the note was for in general. So you've got weapons and you've got a note. There's not just one weapon, there's multiple. I think there was about 4 or 5.
And there was a change of clothes as well.
And a change of clothes in a rucksack near Gracie's stables. And it actually shows you the 999 call of the woman ringing up and reporting the bag, saying, you know, it's suspicious. And I just don't know how it wasn't linked together that it was close to Gracie's horse field or horse stables.
That's the thing as well, isn't it? It was obviously reported, and they'd made a note of it. But again, there's that lack of linking the evidence, and they obviously didn't put that report location wise.
No, it just wasn't linked, was it?
No.
And unfortunately, this then led to Gracie was actually fatally stabbed at her, right next to her stables, wasn't she? Which is, you know, it's a massive letdown from the police when you've been reporting it for this amount of time. And, you know, it's not like she's not been doing anything about it. She was trying her best.
Steps.
She's followed everything you should do in that situation, and she's still being let down by the police. But the family didn't stop there. They got together to campaign to raise awareness. And this is a lot about what the documentary does actually show. So you've got Saj Chowdhury, who is actually Jay's friend, who told us about the documentary, and he is the family solicitor, and he was helping them to find out what happened and go through like the inquest. The Ministry of Justice actually funded Gracie's legal team for the inquest into her death.
Wow.
Because that would have been, I'm guessing, pretty expensive to have someone there. And then there was a lady called Narita Barra Casey.
Right.
And she worked with the team as well. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure on that one. I think I am.
Yeah.
So that was this whole team of people working together to try and find out not just what happened to Gracie, because they knew that They knew who she had been stabbed by. They knew the guy who had done it. But the sort of the situations that led up to it, and was there any responsibility from the police? If the police would have taken action when they first heard about it, if they'd have took all the proper precautions, if they'd have linked two and two together, would Gracie still be here?
Because you'd think after the weapons were found, they could have put a restraining order on. And I know that quite often when stalking becomes a serious, restraining orders aren't taken seriously by the offenders. But surely you would think that they would be the logical next steps.
Well, yeah, you would do. And I've just said about the stalking prevention order being put in place in 2020.
Yeah.
Like, that should have been issued straight away. So one thing the police did fail to do is to go to the place of work and get the disciplinary records.
Yeah.
Because when Gracie obviously told work that she, that he'd followed her, they said, oh, he's done this before. So in that disciplinary file, there was another 8 cases.
Jeez.
And the police had just not gone to get them. And I think if I was the person at the place of work, I probably would have come forward with that information as well and rang the police myself.
Yeah.
Although it's not their job to do it, and it's not their duty to do it at all, and by any means it's not their...
And they probably didn't know how serious it was, did they?
Yeah, by all means, there's no blaming anyone for anything there.
Another thing I noticed as well was that once this bag of weapons was reported, it was Gracie's dad that actually said... They never came to us and said, just so you're aware. I'm assuming because they hadn't linked it, but they never said that it had been found nearby and that Gracie should stay kind of even more alert than she already would have been, because her father said, and again, this was awful, her father said, if we'd have known that there was that level of threat, we wouldn't have let her go anywhere on her own.
Yeah, we wouldn't have let her anywhere of go out.
Yeah. So her family are still fighting for further justice. Aren't they?
Yeah.
And it's just a really tragic case.
Yeah, it is. And one thing that we haven't said is that Michael Sellers actually committed suicide and killed himself after killing Gracie. So it's almost as if there is no justice, is it, for that? And from the evidence in this documentary, when he went out and bought the weapons, he must have gone back and checked that the bag was still there. So this must have all been so premeditated. Yeah. So he's checked that the bag's not there. He's found that obviously the bag's been, taken, moved, handed in or whatever. That same day that he found out that the bag was missing, he went out and purchased the exact same items. So the exact same 3 knives. I think there was a hammer in there as well. There was. And another change of clothes.
So he'd obviously got a plan that he wanted to stick to. He got this idea of what he wanted to do. Yeah,
so obviously it was definitely premeditated, and it does actually show footage on the 18th of June, him putting a box in the back of the car and driving to the stables, and then he'd come back home, and then he went out again, and there was footage as well from I think it was from CCTV or a Ring doorbell at Gracie's house of her leaving through the gate. For the last time, and she got to the stables and was brutally murdered by this guy. And the next her mom knew about it is it
was actually the air ambulance
coming round and saying, "Are you Gracie's mom?" And just to picture someone coming up to you, you just know, don't you?
Yeah.
You sort of just know.
But even to that point, even if your daughter's had these awful experiences of stalking already, you never think it'd go that far. You never...
You wouldn't, would you?
No.
And so the inquest verdict, I think it was about 2 weeks until they got the verdict. And it was unlawful killing due to a stab wound to the neck, which we obviously could have guessed that. And there was multiple police failings, but they couldn't actually prove that any one of them or multiple of them in particular had contributed to Gracie's death. And I thought that was really sad because I wanted someone to take responsibility, because the family must have been going through hell.
Yeah.
And not only just through the stalking must have been upsetting for the family, then the murder, and then having to go through the inquest, and then no one taking responsibility.
Just the way it was all dealt with, really.
I feel like the way it was dealt with in general was awful, but her family now and the solicitors are doing a great job at campaigning to help the police almost and put people as a stalking sort of advocate in every police force.
Yeah, it's really inspirational, I think, because they could have, and they probably do to a certain extent, have such reason to hate the police and be angry at the way that it was dealt with, but what they've actually realised is it's just a case of learning, unfortunately.
And they don't want it to happen to anyone else.
And they don't want it to happen to anyone else, so they're willing to still work with the police to prevent it from happening again.
Yeah. Yeah. And then one of the other cases that was covered in this episode, it's a bit more of a brief case, and it was a lady called Marie, and this was in 2022, who met a guy in lockdown, went on a few dates with him. She met him on some sort of dating website, which we've all done.
We all do.
We've all done. We've all gone on a date from Tinder or, met someone that we've, probably not researched as much as we should or know a great deal about.
No.
And she went on a date with him. After a couple of dates, I think she said, there was, red flags. I wasn't too keen on the situation. So she said, look, we're going to...
Yeah, sorry, it's not for me.
It's not for me. We're going to call it a day. I'm going to get out while I can, basically. Which, when she said that, I was like, yes, good on you.
Yeah.
Good on you. Well done. But a few months later, the guy she went on a date with actually contacts her and says, my van has broke down. I can't get to work. I can't get anywhere. I know that you've got 2 cars. I know this is a bit of a weird situation, but could you possibly help me out?
Yeah, can I borrow it, basically?
Can I borrow one of your cars? So in this situation, she seemed like a lovely lady, to be fair. And she was like, you know what? I thought I'd help him out.
Yeah.
She didn't really think anything of it. And she actually lent him one of her cars. So he took the car, and she later found out there was nothing at all wrong with his van. And he took her car and took it into a garage. I don't know who did this for him, or if he said it was his own car and he wanted a tracker on it to see if it got nicked. Because were his friends working in a garage and did it with him? Or did he do it legitimately, as in...
no one else knew.
No one else knew the reasons behind it. He put a tracker on her car and then said, my van's repaired now. Here's your car back. And he kept turning up at places where she was.
So again, that interaction for her, she wouldn't have thought anything of, because he's asked to borrow the car, he's borrowed it, he's given it her back,
and then
see you
that's
later. That's it. He's not contacted her again.
Yeah.
That's been it.
Yeah.
And yet she then discovers that when she's going anywhere, random places,
He's there. He's turning up.
And again, it wasn't a familiar routine. It was just any time, any place, he would be there.
Yeah.
And at that point, she obviously realised that the only way he could have that information had to be something to do with the car, and that's when they found the tracker.
Yeah. The track was quite big as well, a big red box, wasn't it, on the car? But she said CCTV outside a property had picked him up coming up to her door. She woke up one day to a huge hole in the bush.
Yeah, that was really obscure.
She'd got big hedges outside the house, and there was a massive hole in there.
Yeah.
And she really suffered with this. She got really bad anxiety. She stopped going into work. This is the lady Beth mentioned earlier who developed hair loss. 80% of her hair fell out due to stress.
And she was having CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy as well.
Yeah.
And they'd actually signed her off work. So again, this is the case where they actually said that it was the no fear stalking.
No fear.
But again, from what we've just talked about, she was off work, sick. She was having cognitive behavioural therapy due to this.
And
she'd developed alopecia due to this. We've got evidence of him stalking her, and it was still charged as lack of fear.
And we've got to note as well, she did report all these incidents to the police. These were all on file and all reported. Eventually, he was actually brought in and interviewed, and he admitted that he put the tracker on the car. And because he admitted it, they only gave him a caution. You've just admitted to putting a tracker and following a female without their consent.
Yeah.
And you get a caution. I mean...
Again, it will have just, unfortunately, been down to the evidence. He hasn't then... Yes, he's admitted to that, but then as a result of the tracker, what has happened? Has she been physically harmed? no, therefore there isn't enough
Well,
evidence.
this is where something really unbelievable happened. So the guy, the police officer who was dealing with this, who recommended giving the stalker a caution, right, was later arrested himself for stalking a female police officer and sentenced to 2 years in prison.
God.
So he wanted to give him a caution because he probably thought, oh, it's not bad because he was doing worse to a police officer at work. So the stalker in this case was called Kelvin James. And when he was arrested eventually and charged, they charged him with the lesser crime of stalking without fear, even though there's all this proof that there is fear. So she got the restraining order and she was trying for ages. She was communicating with the CPS, trying to get the case reassessed because she said it's not stalking without fear, it's stalking with fear.
Yeah.
He should be charged for the more serious crime.
Yeah.
And he actually accused Marie of stalking him. He went to a neighbouring police force and accused her of stalking. She got brought in.
Yeah.
She got released under investigation.
And I guess it's good in a way that they take every account seriously. They don't have the perspective that we do looking at it now. So it is good that each case is looked at on a face value basis, basically. He's obviously gone in, he's reported someone.
But there's a reason he reported it to a neighbouring police force. This is calculated for him.
Yeah, and that is where you would think and you would hope that the police forces then communicate and that they then say, oh no, actually what we can see here is that it's another form of control and stalking from his perspective, and it's nothing to do with her.
And, you know, the sad thing in this, he actually got sentenced and went to prison and he barely served any time. I think I can't remember the exact number that he got sentenced for, but he did less than a third of the time.
Again, it's that fear of unknown, isn't it, then? Because
then he's back out as well. But the CPS actually admitted later that he should have actually been charged with the more serious offence of stalking. But they said, we are sorry, we can't... We can't recharge him because he's already served his time. So we're sorry, we can't change what happened. And basically, we're sorry.
That's it. Yeah.
That's it. And it's done. And now he's back out on the street. And it's madness.
And she's still going to be just as scared because,
Obviously,
as we've said, you don't know. You know, he could have spent that time in prison thinking about how he wants to now get revenge.
Yeah. And the maximum time in prison for stalking is actually 10 years for a maximum penalty. I mean, I know that's maximum penalty.
Yeah.
But it's just crazy to think that hardly any of these cases result in convictions when 2 women a week are murdered. 2 women a week are killed in England and Wales. That's crazy.
Yeah, you can't.
2 women a week.
You can't fathom it, can you? So I think realistically, it is the power in people coming forward. It's the difference that makes to the statistics, to the level of learning that the police then have to do, and the other services that we have. It also comes down to acknowledging the fact that victims behave in certain ways because of their circumstance.
Yeah.
You know, we can never judge a victim on having not reported something sooner, having not come forward, because you just don't know what someone else is going through.
Yeah.
But I think hopefully on this episode, we have shown, you know, both the severity of stalking, and also we have shown that the police don't always get it right. We are aware of that. We do know that. But that is why it's just so important to keep talking about these things. Yeah,
and we go back to what I said at the beginning about there's a previous time where I didn't report, but I've had the time that I spoke about with, obviously, I was in a really violent, controlling, abusive relationship, and I didn't report the stalking, and I didn't, you know, I didn't do that at that time, but I was actually somewhere, I wouldn't say recently, maybe a couple of years ago. And I'd pulled up in a car park, and it's sort of one of those car parks where you go and it's where you start off to walk a dog.
Yeah.
So it's the moors, basically.
Yeah.
And I pulled up in this car park, and it's before 4 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like late at night, early morning, anything
late
like that.
afternoon.
Regular.
Yeah.
There's people walking past, they pick the kids up from school, they're taking the dog on a walk, you know, like all that sort of thing. And there's plenty of space in the car park, and I'd reverse parked in, and I was actually meeting a photographer because I wanted to do a photo shoot up there.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I was meeting the photographer, and I thought, I'm not very good with faces, and I thought, oh my God, I can't remember what this guy looks like.
Yeah.
I didn't ask him what car he was driving or anything. Anyway, someone drives into the car park and reverse parks next to me, but that close that I couldn't get out of my driver's door. And there's loads of space in this car park.
I'm going to say, automatically, as a woman...
So I'm like...
you are already
Yeah.
thinking, this car park is full, there is enough
Why
space.
are you here?
Why have you done this?
But I thought, oh, maybe it's the photographer and he doesn't realise how close he's parked to my car. At the time, I was driving a big 4x4.
Yeah.
So I thought, bit weird, but... And I looked over and I thought, if it's the photographer, he'll probably recognise me and be like,
Yes.
oh, hi, I'm here.
Yeah.
And I'd glanced over and this guy's there staring at me. So I'm thinking, don't look like the photographer. It looks like a bit of an older guy. I don't know what I'm going to do here.
Yeah.
So I sat in the car, got my phone out, no signal. I was like, damn.
Yeah. What?
I thought, well, there's people around. It's
Yeah.
going to be fine.
Yeah.
So here's what I did. I thought, he must be the photographer. He's waiting for me to get out of the car. So I squeezed out of the gap. Obviously, he'd parked so close to my car.
Yeah.
I squeezed out and I went round to the back of the car.
Yeah.
I opened my boot and I started getting a bag out because it's
Yeah.
what I'd got, like a change of clothes in and stuff. And as I glanced to the car at the side of me, I could see his head turned round and looking at me through the headrests.
God.
And I was like, no, this is weird. I
Yeah.
shut the door and I
Horrendous.
jumped back in the car and I locked the doors. And I
Yeah.
thought, right, I need to figure out what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And you know, you can feel someone staring.
Yeah, you just know that there's a presence there.
But bearing in mind, I'm in a higher car. So my car is very high up. I
Yeah.
can see directly into his car. Sorry.
It's all right.
So as I turned to look at him, I thought for some reason, get my camera out, ready?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a shame that we now have to
to do
think
that,
like
yeah.
that. You have to think, I need proof of this.
Yeah.
Your head is all over the place, but you still have to think
Get proof of it.
Yeah.
So I got the camera out on my phone, and as soon as I turned to the side, I started videoing him. And he'd got his trousers down in the car, and obviously everything was exposed. He was doing whatever he was doing to himself, and I could directly see that. So anyway, I looked and then got a bit of it on camera and obviously turned back away again. I thought, I don't want to look, I don't want to encourage anything.
Yeah.
What do I do?
Yeah.
And then,
But that's horrendous. Like,
so
that is just...
I was thinking, he's exposed himself. He's performing a sex act on himself at the
Yeah.
side of me in the car while children are walking past the front of the car to go on dog walk with their parents.
Yeah.
So I was like, instantly wound my window down
They're at risk.
and shouted.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
pervert, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
God knows what I was shouting, some profanities. Anyway, people are walking past me just looking like, are you
Thinking
crazy?
that you're the crazy
Oh, you
one.
an absolute nutter.
Yeah.
So anyway, I waited when I started shouting at him, he obviously covered himself up, started his car, drove off.
Right. Okay.
So I thought, right, okay, take a breath. Then the photographer came and I found it was a photographer and I said, this is what's just happened to me.
Thank God you were meeting someone there.
Yeah.
Because if you've been in that situation, your adrenaline is going crazy. I mean, you could have gone and told some randomer, but I mean, what would they have done?
Yeah.
They might not believe you. You don't know the circumstance.
And
it's just a good job that...
someone was there
Yeah,
to meet me.
yeah.
But it turned out the photographer that I was working with was a call handler for the police.
Right.
So he was like, get in the car,
Yeah.
we're going to go down and we're going to get signal and I'm going to report this myself. I'm
Right,
going to
'cause
ring
then-
up.
yeah.
So he did that and he said, right, it's reported. And he said, do you want to carry on? Do you want to reschedule? And I said, right, let's carry on. You're here now. I'm fine.
Yeah.
And as we were driving out of the car park to go and get signal and report, the guy was coming back up into the car park. And I was like, Liam is there.
Yeah.
Like, he is there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd got the registration number of the car. I'd got him driving off. I took videos.
Yeah.
I thought, right. So we rang the police. The police came round. West Yorkshire Police, absolutely amazing. They were at my house within the day. Made the report on it. That was over and done with. At this case, it's not stalking. It's an indecent exposure.
Yes.
Didn't think much of it. in general. It was, just put into perspective, this is about 5-6 miles away from my house.
Okay.
Okay, so it's quite a distance.
Yeah.
A couple of days later, gets to the weekend, I am pulling into my driveway at home, and like where...
Which is out of the way, really. It's not... Yeah.
It's not like you can see it. It's a bit tucked back, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he was driving up the road.
Jeez.
And I did the registration number. I was like, what the fuck?
God.
Like, oh my God.
And then automatically you're on your own patch there. It's so
And I saw
unnerving.
it and I was like, this is unnerving. And he went to the roundabout, drove around and drove back up past my house. And by this point, the traffic had not cleared for me to pull into my driveway.
Okay.
And I thought, do I not pull into my driveway because he knows where I am?
Because I didn't know which one.
What do I do?
Yeah.
Anyway, I went in, told Jay, reported it to the police. And then one day, a little bit later, me and Jay were out and my car was quite distinctive at the time. And he probably wouldn't have known that Jay was driving the car.
Yeah.
And it was me that was in the passenger seat. And I looked in the mirror, in the wing mirror. The car is behind us.
God.
And I was
directly behind you?
It was behind us, yeah. And I was like, no way. So we went back, rang the police, and they said, right, that's enough, we're going to bring him in.
Yeah.
And 6 o'clock in the morning, they went to his house, they did what they said, they brought him in, they asked for my social media. They said, have you ever had your driveway redone? Because that's what he does. They told me his name.
Yeah.
They said, we don't know where he's seen you, we don't know where he's found you, we don't know where he's following you from.
Because again, it's a
is
random...
it social media?
Yeah, is it a random link?
So they checked his social media on his phone. They actually got into his phone and checked it and said, he doesn't follow you on social media. We don't know how it happened. Did he do it because he was an exhibitionist and I was in a higher car and I could look down at him? And had he targeted me because of my car and he wanted to expose himself to someone? And I was there's a select amount of people that are young women with a 4x4 that would be up in that area.
So kind of random to an extent, but equally calculated because it had to fit that.
But then I've seen him 4 times since.
Yeah.
It's weird. Anyway, he got released. Eventually, there weren't enough evidence. And he said, yes, I was up in that place. I was walking my dog. I was whatever. I know you weren't.
No.
But luckily, nothing has ever... I've never seen him again or anything like that. But a pretty weird...
horrendous
situation, but not quite as serious as my ex-boyfriend doing it.
But again, that's just luck, isn't it? And thankfully, hopefully his interactions with the police were enough to put a stop to it. And
but then I read, Jay sent me an article the other day and it said a guy that had already been done for indecent exposure and doing sex acts on himself in front of women, had then murdered someone, a woman.
Yeah,
and it escalates.
Potential escalation.
At least that's logged now, so that if anything else does come up, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But with my ex-boyfriend, he just knew where I lived.
Yeah, he's got all that information to hand
He turned up at my house one day with a guy from his work, right, with clipboards in the hand. I don't know what they did. It was something like some door-to-door thing. And I opened the door and he pretended that he didn't know me and that they were there to do some sort of survey with me. And I had to stand at the door face to face with a guy who had physically assaulted me and not say anything. And his work person who he was with obviously didn't know anything about it because they were just like, we're prospecting the area.
It's just another way of making you vulnerable, isn't it?
Yeah, he did a whole... I could do a full episode on the heap of stuff that he did that was stalking, but we'll not get onto that now. You'll be bored of listening to my whole life experiences. But it's just absolutely crazy. So a bit of a different episode there for you today, but I hope it's give you a bit more of a insight. I feel like we can be more ourselves on these episodes and give our give our opinions on things a little bit more freely,
and wherever we can give our personal experiences,
we will do.
We will.
We are very open and we're happy to share with you whatever aspect of my life you want to know,
because it's important. It's important, and it is big. I think that's no matter who you're talking to or which way you are getting the information out there. Yeah. It's important to do it. So
it is 100%. But we're going to end on a lighter note today because we have got quite a few reviews in, and thank you so much for our 5-star reviews. Every review we've got has been 5 stars. Yes. So thank you. And we've hit so many different countries this week. Where have we? Australia, the US, Ireland. So thank you to all our international listeners. It sounds like we're proper podcasters now. Like, it sounds weird saying all this. So if you have enjoyed listening to the episode, please leave us a review. And so far, we've only got the ones where they click 5 stars.
Yeah.
But you can actually write us like a little something.
Tell us you like our voice.
Yeah. Tell us you like me in a tracksuit and Beth in a summer dress so that I can carry on doing this. Yeah. So I think, have you got anything else for this week?
I think that's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And we will see you next week. Bye.
Take care.